so on. And one of the posts that you did to that point was about the little, something that all writers have, which is the little voice in the back of their head that says, you're not good enough, or what you do isn't good enough, or you're not really a writer. And in your case, you actually put that on into an image.
Yeah.
Can you tell
Can
us
you
about
see
that
him?
post?
I know the audience can't see him, but he's behind me in a picture frame.
And
He learned.
what did you call him? You called him the mean kid on the skateboard, or?
Yes. What did I call him? Oh man, why can't I remember? It was probably inappropriate. I used a lot of bad words in the post. I really did. That was one thing I was worried about. I was like, I'm gonna come on here and say bad words on her podcast, but
No, that's okay. No worries.
He's was it the dirt bag on the hoverboard? He keeps telling me I suck, something like that. But yes, and then I polled my readers to try to give him a name, and I think we landed on Dolt.
Right.
Dolt Brundleson, yeah. And my husband drew him. Of course, your audience can't see this because it's a podcast. This is people who've never done podcasts forget. But yes, he's on my Substack though. If you want to know what he looks like.
Yes.
Greater listening audience. But yes, and that was a rough week, and I've been for some reason more shy lately to do nonfiction posts like that, and I kind of want to get over that, because I feel like when you're in those moments of just real frustration and throwing your hands up in the air, like some really good stuff can come out. And then it's just, I think I was just quicker on the publish button back then. I was like, you know what, this is how I'm feeling, and here you guys are going to consume it. And then it was just really funny how many people responded with, and that I like that part too, like with nonfiction, which I do some of, is just how much conversation happens from those posts.
Oh, they're my favorite posts. That's what they are. They're a peek behind the curtain.
Absolutely. And a chance to swear a lot.
Yeah.
In my case.
Right. So how do you, I will post to that particular post in the Substack, in my, podcast notes, but tell me how do you get over that hump when you have those feelings of unworthiness?
Ooh, interestingly, a lot of times I'll read someone else's Substack post and they'll either have just gotten past their own hump, or they're in the process of getting over it and offering some advice. But a lot of times those posts from other people will hit me at a really good time, because the slumps don't last very long. I always find, and that's just a reason to keep reading on Substack too. Like sometimes I feel a lot of pressure. It's everyone that you've talked to probably has said, like, I subscribe to too many Substacks. It's like I've tried really hard to keep mine under 30, and it's really hard. Thankfully, not everyone posts as often, but I do find there are some people who do a good job of processing those harder times and then offering not even a solution, because everyone's solution is going to be different. Sometimes it's just being distracted or getting up and doing something else, or going back and finding a win, because that's one thing. I think I have a post on there somewhere about, what did I call it? Like little highs and big lows, or something like that, where I struggled so much to celebrate wins, but I really wallow in the losses.
Yes.
And I think that's, when you hear that other people are going through that, it does make you feel better. It's not like you want everyone to be miserable, but it makes you feel like less of a weirdo when other people are suffering with you. So I guess a lot of times that's what does it. It's just, I'm like, okay, I can't write right now, then I'll read. Yes. And then I'll just read something that, it might not just immediately turn the switch, but at least it gets me.
That's it.
Remembering that I'm going to get over it. So
have you ever heard of the book Outlander?
I'm thinking of the Netflix series.
Yeah, that was based on a book. That's based on a book series. Yeah.
Yes, I binged that heavily during the pandemic.
Some people don't get past the first season.
It's raw.
It is.
But I enjoyed it. I actually haven't watched the last two. I don't think I haven't caught up.
Gotcha. But
I'm too busy writing. But at the time, yes, I did.
So that was based on a book. And she just thought Diana gabbled on, I'm just going to write this book and probably no one's ever going to read it, but I think I can be, a novel fiction writer and I'm just going to write it. So obviously, I mean, we all know where that ends up, right? She's on her like 12th book or 15th book, whatever. But she wrote this other book called The Outlandish Companion. And in it, she includes all kinds of details about the series, but also her personal writing.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a writer by trade, but for journals and for, all kinds of instruction manuals, those kinds of things. And when she talked about her process, she said, I had to write for all these different things. And so if I got stuck, I would just put it down and then start writing for the other thing.
Right.
Right. And then when I wasn't writing, I was always thinking about the next scene or the next, whatever. And
Right.
I'm thinking to myself, that makes sense, because then you're not wasting time, which is great. You're always, if you're not writing, you're thinking about it, whatever. And then I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, how does that go along with being present in your life?
This is a huge point that you're making, and very strangely, like, telling into the future. I'm writing a post about this right now because just in the last, I have a post coming out on Thursday, a fiction piece, but I had like a slump that lasted through one of my post cycles. And so I put up this greatest hits post, which of course is a little bit of a cop out because I didn't have anything new to share. And also because I had a bunch of new subscribers and I kind of wanted, the interesting thing about my Substack is, depending on when you show up, you could get caked, or you could get something really like sweet and sentimental. So like, it really just depends on when you show up. And sometimes I feel I need to prepare people or explain to them, I'm like, this is not what you're going to read every week, but
Right.
this is how it is. So, but I had this little slump and I was like, why can't I do this right now? And it was frustrating and I was worried. And then I realized, and I don't want to give too much away because I'm going to write about it, but I really was spending too much time in my head thinking about, not even so much thinking, well, I was thinking about stories and I even started a couple, but they weren't gelling. And so I think something's happening, and I think it might be happening universally, because I feel like when I actually talk to people in real life, which I don't do enough of either, I think people are just observing less. There's so much input to be had, and sometimes it's voluntarily and sometimes it's not, just with the way the internet works, and this need to kind of consume as things are being thrown at you. Like, I was just out of space in my head for new things. And then I also realized too, because there's a couple of authors on Substack I read a lot of fiction, and I do a good job of just honing in on like real life stuff, like just people in a situation that you might actually see, or they'll observe something and then they'll expand on it. And a lot of times my stories are a little off the wall, and so they're kind of happening in a space that like no one's really familiar with, but I try to like, involve elements that they can relate to, like for instance, the cake story. Whether you can relate to that or not, you can relate to the cake part and how cake is amazing. So where was I going with this? So yeah, just the paying attention to where, because I take walks every day, and a lot of times I'll have music on, but I'm still thinking. I'm thinking about stories, I'm thinking about upcoming posts. And then you go even further and you're like, how are people going to receive this? You're thinking about stuff that really doesn't matter or shouldn't matter. It's that sort of like trying to foresee the future. I do a lot of that, catastrophizing and that sort of stuff. But what I'm not doing when I'm out walking and thinking is like paying attention to what I'm walking past, where my feet are landing. Like, I've kind of gotten so far into my brain that I'm just not aware of what's happening around me. And so I'm trying to sort of reverse that a little bit, but it's like a muscle that you have to not let atrophy. Like, I feel like since the pandemic, when we all kind of had this excuse to be really insular and like closed off and hiding essentially from the world, it's been years now, and I still feel like it's a little bit like a foreign country to me when I walk outside my door and walk through my neighborhood that I've lived in for 9 years. So I think getting back to that and just seeing the potential in what you're actually experiencing, and not what you think, what you're fantasizing about, which is another thing I do a lot. So yeah, so I definitely hear what you're saying. There's just it's, yeah, remembering to take stock, so to speak.
Yeah. And so that will be in an upcoming post on your Substack.
Yes, I'm working on that. Yeah,
That,
because yeah,
that's awesome. Okay, so let me switch gears and talk a little bit about your writing process. And you have a book out and it's called C.Smile. Tell us
yes.
about that and where people can find it.
Sure. So it's a YA novel. I would file it under contemporary romance. I decided to publish it on Wattpad, which is, and I'm not going to speak to Wattpad like someone who's a super expert on it. I know it exists and I know it has a very large YA audience, which is why I decided to go there. This book in particular, it was the fourth YA book I wrote. And it actually, at a conference, I won a pitch contest for it. So if I can give you my log line. So the book is about a really passionate girl who's on a quest to lose her virginity to her first love by the end of her senior year, who unexpectedly falls for this boy who's coming to terms with his asexuality. So
Yikes,
yes.
a bee. Okay.
And it's a huge book. This is part of the problem. So I did pitch it for a while to agents. Most of them just never got back to me, which is, I'd almost rather they get back to me and say no, thank you. But there's a lot of crickets. And I'm very fond of the book. I love it. And then what's nice about Wattpad is they don't care about word count. Teenagers don't care about word count. It's only publishers who have to spend money on paper that care about it. So the book is up there on Wattpad. One thing I've learned about Wattpad is you can't just show up with no audience and expect an audience to appear out of thin air, because that has not happened. It's very algorithmically driven. And I don't know how to work those things. I really don't. I think there is a science to them that if you know how to do it, you might do better. It's really about getting people to engage with it. And what I find happens over there a lot is someone will pop into my book and say, oh, hi, welcome to Wattpad. I wrote this book. I'd love it if you'd come and read it. You know, it's a lot of, I showed up for you, stranger, now you show up for me kind of stuff. And that's hard for me because it feels disingenuous and it a little bit transactional. And I get that's part of the business. But for me, it's hard. I'd rather have a personal connection,
organic,
to the person that's reading my book and not feel immediately in the wording of that kind of comment that they're just looking for me to come over and play on their book. Because it is a lot of like, you know, there's a little star there. People hit the star that moves you up, you know, and if people follow you. So it's, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm doing horribly over there. I'm not winning anything. But the book is there and it's a beautiful book. I'm very proud of it. I would love to have people go and give it a whirl. It will make you hot and bothered if you're of that mindset or that interests you at all.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all of that mindset?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I like to think so, but
yes,
not everyone's willing to admit it. But
I am.
yes. So, well, I invite you to go. Honestly, the first couple of chapters hopefully would pull you in, and then it's just a really fun journey for a lot of really beautiful characters.
Nice.
So
you would like to traditionally publish it.
That would be my goal. The real issue with this particular book is the length. For YA, it's just too long. I know of well-known YA authors who have published longer books, but typically a debut novel
right
needs to be what it needs to be for anyone to even look at it.
Like a part 1 and part 2?
But see, who am I? Who's going to buy a part 1 from someone that they'd never heard of?
Listen, and this is the thing. You're right. I know you're right. Industry.
Yeah,
and all
it's
that,
hard.
But again,
this is me quitting before I start. So you're right too.
Yeah, it's content. We're talking about content, and good content breaks all. Like I was just giving a presentation with one of my colleagues, Kate Brenton, and we do a, twofer. I talk about book marketing. She talks about your writing process and getting your book written.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of an interesting dynamic because what we're trying to do is say, hey, listen, writers, start thinking about book marketing as you're writing your book. so that after you're done, you're not like, oh my God, I have this whole other thing I have to learn.
Right.
So what it was I had just written an article about the author who wrote Gone Girl,
Hmm.
and no one wanted to buy that book because what publishers and agents told her was that nobody wanted to read a book about a protagonist who was the bad guy, female.
Right.
And
Hmm.
oh yeah, well,
Right.
I mean, the woman's she's on to her own publishing company right now. I don't think that she even writes anymore. She doesn't have to.
Right.
He's on to other things. So that
Mhm.
book, that movie, I mean, everything just took off. So, and that's how these new genres are created. Diana Gabaldon, we were just talking about, that's a whole nother, no one's going to, that first book is ginormous. No one's going
Mhm.
to buy it. Uh-huh. Where are we now? So I think, bucking the trend with good content happens all the time. And maybe
Right.
that's going to be that's going to be your book.
Mhm.
I like what you wrote in your bio as well. So have you put, I'm just curious, have you put a post on Substack linking to your book?
Yes, I have. I actually wrote an entire post about the book, so the synopsis is there,
Yes.
all that. So I can, it's
Yeah.
actually the title of the post is Heartfelt AF. So, because I gave myself an award in it. I made up an award and put it on the cover of my book. So,
Do that.
because
Let's
as
do that.
all awards are made up, as they say.
That's it.
So,
And then
exactly.